to relationship driven.
Sure. I think that makes sense. And how often would you say, I know you're mentioning about these kind of price and spec driven, call it RFPs. How often would you say that these, cities, states are looking to kind of refresh their technology?
A wholesale refresh or just maybe a different component?
Both.
Okay. A wholesale refresh, that's kind of unusual. Usually it's component driven. The only time I've seen kind of wholesale, and maybe we're talking like, 12, 15, 20 signals, is when you do upgrades to, say, a quarter. Maybe you're installing, adaptive signal control where you're gonna say, hey, we're gonna manage this quarter, and we're gonna go away from pre-timed, for instance, signals, and we're gonna go to totally adaptive, or we're gonna be adaptive in the AM and PM peaks. So, that typically is done on a quarter basis, and maybe you tackle a quarter per year or a couple per year, and gradually, you kind of reintegrate or upgrade your system like that. Or you take pieces of downtowns, and you say, okay, we're going to do some major east-west streets or some major north-south streets. And maybe, again, that's only like, 10, 15 signals. But it's a little unusual to do hundreds of signals at a time because, one, it's pretty expensive. And then, once you plug and play that system and try to get it up and running, there's a risk of, if it doesn't work right out of the gate, you've got 100 signals maybe that are just totally screwed up, and then the public is not real happy, and neither are your elected officials. So maybe it's
sure.
more of a medium size. Now, where I have seen a larger scale is maybe you want to, add a different component inside the controllers. Maybe you want to add, better leading intervals for pedestrians, perhaps. And that's a pretty easy fix. All things considered, it only just maybe has an all red phase for a second or two. And, most people wouldn't even notice that is there. And that's something that maybe you would do on the entire downtown grid, for instance, which would be, 70, 80, 90, 100 signals. That small component. But they really, traffic engineers are kind of a conservative bunch. They are risk averse. They don't want to screw things up or have a chance to take things, that far. So they tend to shy away from big deployments in my experience.
Okay. That makes sense. You kind of alluded to kind of the criteria. It's price and specs and maybe technology, but it sounds like most of these guys are pretty on par in terms of technology. Would you say?
I
technology?
think so. There are some differences in, say, like their user interface, for instance. I know I'm familiar with like the Syntrax, which is an O'Connellate, product, and it has a pretty intuitive interface. It'll pop up like a schematic map, and if you've got a particular facet of their system, it'll tell you when something's wrong. It has like a failure detector, more or less, and one of them like will be blinking kind of red, and then you can drill down to it and say, what is going on? Is there an electrical failure, for instance? We've had a storm, and if we're just running on batteries and the light's doing flash, and how do you reset it, or how do you implement new timing? So it's got that. It's got like almost like a street view, like Google. It'll show you the legs of the intersection. You can see, maybe somebody clocked one of the poles if they've had a crash, or the contractor maybe has been out there and erroneously cut a loop, if that's what you're still using rather than cameras. But I think some of the differences are in how easy it is to change the signals, for instance, remotely, whether or not a traffic technician or a traffic engineer has to be at his or her desk, and could they do it from at home, logged into a virtual private network. or do they have to physically go out into